Taxing the rich is not going to work. It doesn't really solve any problems. It doesn't provide any true solutions to the issues we have with, let's say, wealth disparities and housing being way too expensive. It doesn't solve any of that. All that taxing the rich is going to do is flood the system with even more money. And in this video, I want to explain to you why I think this is the case. Let's get started. So many people think that taxing the rich is the best way to go about paying off, let's say, the US government debt, the Canadian government debt, all the debt that these governments have accumulated over time. They think that taxing the rich would help significantly. And I don't think that's really the case. I don't think that would work at all because the amount of debt that the US government has is too much for them to pay it back. They're never going to be able to pay that debt back. The US government owes $37.5 trillion. And there's no way for this to be paid back because the current US federal tax revenue is $5.5 trillion. So the debt per citizen is $109,317. The debt per taxpayer is $324,123. And the revenue per citizen is only $16,132. So this number will continue to rise forever. There's a point of no return when the US government is borrowing the way that it is. You can see the data for how much money they're borrowing. The largest budget items, Medicare and Medicaid, is $1.7 trillion. There's no return on this. Social Security is $1.545 trillion. And again, there's no return on this. And one of the problems here is that the cost of Social Security keeps going up and it'll continue to go up forever. But the value that citizens get from earning Social Security won't be there. It'll be worth less and less over time because the dollars that they're getting are being devalued. The CPI inflation rate that we're told is reality is actually fake. And then on top of that, we have the interest on debt, the amount of interest that they're paying every single year on this debt. It keeps going up. Now the interest on debt is more than defense and war. At some point, this is going to take over this number here. So it's the interest on the debt is going to be more than the US federal tax revenue because the US national debt will continue to compound. And then on top of that, the US government will continue to borrow more. They'll keep revolving their debt, they'll keep refinancing, and they'll keep borrowing more and more forever. And these numbers are just going to get worse and worse. On top of this, the US government has massive amounts of unfunded liabilities, which come from Social Security and Medicare. These are the amounts of money that they owe in the future to people who are being promised these benefits today. So you can see here, unfunded liabilities represent future payment obligations that exceed projected tax revenues and existing assets estimated in the tens of trillions of dollars. So this number here isn't even accurate. There isn't actually only $37.5 trillion worth of debt. There's way more than this because the US government can keep spending more and more. They can spend much faster than the rich can create value. So the problem here is that if they keep spending and the rich give them a massive tax amount and they pay a massive tax, and let's say this gets cleared somehow. I don't know how that would happen. I don't think that would happen. But let's say this gets cleared. Do you think that the US government is just going to stop spending money? Not at all. They're going to spend more because now they don't have any debt. This is what happens when people don't understand the financial system. This is what happens when people don't understand how money works. When people don't understand that you have to have a certain amount of income in order to pay for your expenses. And in the current financial system, you don't need to understand that. When people don't understand that, this is what happens. They borrow as much money as they can. The people who are in charge of the country are massively financially irresponsible. They don't know what they're doing. They're spending way more and they're going to continue to spend more. And now we have a shutdown in the US government because of the insane amount of spending and the fact that they can't agree on what to spend money on. So let's say the US government does tax the rich. They charge them an unrealized capital gains tax on all of the assets they have, on all of the income that they're earning from those assets. And the rich pay that tax. How are they going to pay that tax? Number one, either they have to sell the assets that they have and they have to give them to somebody else, and they won't have those assets for the future. So maybe they won't be able to generate revenues and profits for the future, meaning that the future tax revenue for the US government is gone. Or maybe they'll borrow against those assets. They'll go to their bank, they'll borrow against the house that they have, the massive amount of land that they have, the businesses that they have, the shares that they have. They'll borrow against them and then they'll pay the tax. So the unrealized capital gains tax is paid, but they went to the bank and they had more money created out of thin air to pay for the tax. So what does this do? This is just going to create more money in the system because the US government, once they pay back the debts, they're paying back other people who can spend into the economy as well. So if the US government pays back that debt, what are those people going to do? They're going to find other ways to save. Today, the US dollar is considered a savings vehicle. US Treasury bonds are also considered a savings vehicle. So if the US government pays back the debt, it destroys that savings vehicle. And the people who are using that savings vehicle today are going to have to find something else to save in. What are they going to save in? Are they going to buy index funds? Are they going to buy gold? Are they going to buy real estate? Whatever they buy is going to increase in value. So that value is going to be transferred from the US national debt, which is, I almost like to think of it as a cushion. So if the US national debt didn't exist, these people wouldn't have to give the US government their money and they'd be buying something else. So this is a cushion. It absorbs all of the liquidity from the market. And instead of people buying things like more houses, they're buying these treasury notes and they're guaranteeing their consumption for the future. They're basically kicking the can down the road for themselves. But over time, these treasuries lose value, meaning the people who are saving in them aren't able to spend as much in the future. So this debt that the US government is taking on shouldn't be paid back because if they pay it back, then it gives money to other people and those people will start spending that money into the economy and it'll boost prices anyways. What has to happen is we have to have a change in the financial system. The base layer of the financial system has to change. The current financial system is based on trust. It's based on a form of money that can be created out of nothing. There are all these loopholes that the wealthy can take advantage of, and they don't have to pay taxes. Even if they do have to pay taxes, they can just go to their bank and they can have the bank create more money out of thin air at a very low interest rate, and they can pay back those taxes. So they get to hold on to those assets anyways. They're not going to sell those assets into the market, meaning that the price of those assets probably won't come down. If your main concern here is that the real estate market is way overinflated and houses are too expensive, then taxing the rich won't make a difference because, again, the rich can just go to the bank, they can borrow money against their asset, and they never have to sell it. They don't even have to give that asset away. They borrow against the asset, they pay back the liability that they have, and they keep the asset because they know that the debt that they took on to pay back their liability is going to decrease in value over time. The price of the asset will continue to rise and it'll continue to rise. And eventually, the liability that they owe will be nearly nothing compared to the value of that asset. They'll just refinance the asset, they'll just borrow more money, pay back the debt, and keep kicking the can down the road. So, the solution here to really change things is to move to a different form of money. Today, the banks can create more money out of thin air. So, anything you save is constantly being devalued because more and more of it is being added to the system and value is based on supply and demand. If there's more money being added to the system, supply is increasing, demand is being fulfilled. We need to go to a money that can't be created out of thin air. We need to find a form of money that if you hold it, nobody else can debase it. If you own it, then nobody else can stop you from using it. There's a reason why the wealthy never sell their assets. It's because they know that the value of the asset is going to continue to rise in terms of US dollars because the US dollar is a piece of trash. It's worthless. It's worth absolutely nothing. The value of the US dollar is purely based on trust. And if that trust disappears, if it fades overnight, then the US dollar is now worthless. But the wealthy still have the assets that they own. So they still have the real estate, they still have the stocks, they still have the gold. And all of that will be valued in a different currency whenever it does get created. The wealthy assume that the next currency that the world will create is going to be another fiat currency and it'll be created out of thin air and the value of their assets will continue to rise and continue to rise. So the wealthy are protected no matter what, while the poor who don't have assets, who don't quite understand that the US dollar is worthless, they're going to keep getting destroyed. Their finances are going to keep getting worse and worse, and they're going to have to work more and more just to sustain their lifestyles because their savings will continue to lose value forever. What we need is a form of money that can't be created out of thin air, like I said, Bitcoin, because that way, if you have to pay a tax, you have to pay it in that currency. If you don't have that currency, then you can't pay the tax. You have to declare bankruptcy. You have to give away everything you have. So people are going to think more before they make their decisions to, let's say, buy things that maybe they don't need. Today, because we can create money out of thin air, the wealthy don't have to think about opportunity costs. They can buy whatever they want to. They can spend in excess. They can buy more food than they need. They can buy more houses than they need. They can buy more clothes than they need, while everybody else is suffering and they don't have enough for themselves to maintain their basic standard of living. So with Bitcoin, you're going to see a system where prices of everything come down. The price of housing will come down. You're going to see at some point the price of a house will be less than 1 Bitcoin. Today, the price of a house is about 3.5 to 4 Bitcoin. And the way that this helps you to succeed financially is if you save in Bitcoin, if you keep putting away more and more Bitcoin over time, eventually your Bitcoin is going to give you financial freedom because Bitcoin is going to increase in purchasing power and people will be willing to give you more for less Bitcoin. They'll be willing to give you a bigger house for the same amount of Bitcoin over time. So today, maybe you can buy something like a 2,000 square foot house for 5 Bitcoin in certain parts of the world. At some point, that same house is going to cost you 2.5 Bitcoin, or 5 Bitcoin will buy you double the size of housing. So today, maybe you can buy 2,000 square feet of housing for 5 Bitcoin, or in the future, maybe you'll be able to buy 10,000 square feet of housing for 5 Bitcoin. And then at some point, it'll be 20,000 square feet of housing for 5 Bitcoin. And at some point, it'll be 100,000 square feet of housing for just 5 Bitcoin because the value of Bitcoin will keep rising and we can create more houses if we really want to. So the solution isn't to tax the rich. It isn't to take money from the wealthy and redistribute it to the poor because the money is the problem. We have to look at this from first principles. The solution is to change the money so that it can't be created out of thin air anymore. People have been brainwashed to believe that inflation is good for them, but in reality, deflation is good for them. Why wouldn't you want your cost of living to decrease over time? Why wouldn't you want to be able to spend the same amount of time at work, but improve your lifestyle over time rather than spending more time at work while your lifestyle gets worse and worse? The wealthy will tell you that inflation is good for the economy, deflation is bad for you. They'll tell you that the US dollar is always going to be money. They'll tell you that the currency needs to be separate from assets, but Bitcoin flips all of that on its head. It changes everything. Bitcoin is deflationary. It kills inflation. Nothing can be inflationary on a Bitcoin standard because Bitcoin is truly finite. It gets rid of the need to buy assets. So you don't have to buy stocks. You don't have to buy real estate. You don't have to buy gold if you save in Bitcoin. You could just save in Bitcoin. And then on top of that, if you have Bitcoin and you want to buy something and other people only want Bitcoin, you have to give them Bitcoin. So you have to give them value for value. While today, you don't have to give them value for value. You can give them something that can be created out of nothing and it really has zero value. So the solution here isn't to tax the rich. The solution is to change the money. If you change the money, you're going to change everything. You're going to change the entire world. Everything that we are so used to today, everything that's so terrible is going to change if we change to a Bitcoin standard. Almost everything that we hate today, like the student loans, having to borrow for 40 years to buy a house, having to buy assets because your money isn't working, all of that gets removed on a Bitcoin standard. If you can change to a better form of money, you're going to change everything. The downstream effects of having a money that can be created out of thin air are massive, and most people are underestimating them and they're distracted by wanting to tax the rich or claiming that we have corporate greed or all these other issues that the government wants us to believe, when in reality, the money has to be changed to something that can't be printed out of thin air.